For those that are struggling right now in these dark times for the Memphis Grizzlies, rejoice, for it has been reported by Drew Hill of the Daily Memphian that Ja Morant is ramping up. He's getting ready for his return, starting to get some reps with the ones and the twos, actually participating in the meat and potatoes of practice. What does that mean for the Grizzlies? Looking ahead to tonight against the Utah Jazz as well. Ja Morant will not be on the floor for that one. All that and more coming up on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to this Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. I am one of your hosts, Joe Mullinax of Bluff City Media, joined as always when I am so fortunate to have him alongside me, Mr. Damichael of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. He's the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. I am, again, Grizzlies columnist for Bluff City Media. Between the two of us, you've come to the right place if you're looking for Memphis Grizzlies content on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're checking us out on YouTube. You can also like, comment, rate, review, subscribe wherever you get podcasts. We are proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Whether you are an everydayer or whether this is your first time checking out the show, everything in between, we are grateful that you are with us. Damichael, we got some good feedback on our episode yesterday, the trial of Taylor Jenkins. I think most people in the comments disagreed with us on YouTube. But we got some good feedback in terms of liking the structure of the show. That was kind of nice. Yeah. And when I listened back to it this morning, as I normally do on my way to work, my gavel came through like a charm. Like that was, it's like I had a real gavel.
I heard it too. Yeah.
Not a Brevin Knight bobblehead, which is still here with me. But it was a fun episode. Nice little unique spin on things. Thanks, guys and gals, for the feedback on YouTube. And wherever you get your podcast, shoot us a line, leave us a comment, Apple, Spotify, all that stuff. It's all good when it comes to giving us good or bad feedback. We love to hear from you here at Locked On Grizzlies. Damichael, major news. Well, I don't want to say major news because it's kind of assumed, but it's good to hear it actually occurring. You know, we mentioned Drew Hill, one of your counterparts. He's over at the Daily Memphian. He had a report today from practice that the Grizzlies are starting the process of ramping up Ja Morant. Right now, you've said in the past around December, early December. Obviously, we're a couple days away from that, so it lines up with the timeline for the most part. But, you know, Taylor Jenkins said that they were getting him in, you know, throwing to the fire, I think is what the article said. Yeah. The idea of, you know, playing against the ones, being a two, you know, maybe not being somebody that is just a scout team player anymore. What does that mean for this Grizzlies team? Is that a shot in the arm? You're close to the end of these Ja Morant-less days. Does it really matter because you still got 9 games without the guy? Yeah. Where do you think the team's mindset, since you're around them so much, where do you think they're thinking as Morant begins that ramp-up process? If not, you know, yesterday, then in the next couple of days?
Yeah, you would like to – I think this is the way that I view it. You know, this is just from being around the players a lot. The players are tired of losing regardless. You know, this isn't a group that's like, man – when we get Ja back, it'll all turn around. Like, sure, there is part of that in their heads. But at the same time, they want to win now. So the frustration that we talked about and things like that, that's not going to change just because Ja Morant is suddenly practicing, you know, with the first team more than he has in the past. But the other side of that is getting Ja out there. Again, as we said and kind of alluded to in the past, about this suspension, when we found out that he could practice with the team, here's the good part about it, because now as he ramps up, when he gets back, he won't be on too much of a, you know, minutes restriction and things like that, because now they're throwing him into the fire, as Taylor Jenkins said, and he's getting, you know, that experience. He's getting to break that sweat, you know, through practices. And any of those times where the Grizzlies have 2 days in between games, where one day they'll have an individual day where he says they do their vitamin works and things like that. And then the next day they'll have a practice as they did on yesterday, and they go a little bit harder. So Ja Morant getting that experience, ramping up with the group, it's big for the team. I think where it'll be more important is when they get more of these guys back into the fold. We know Marcus Smart, Xavier Tillman, all of those guys are still out right now. Luke Kennard. I'm looking forward to a week or two from now when Marcus Smart is out of the boot, because he's still in the boot right now. When Marcus Smart's out of that boot, when Luke Kennard is closer to his return, Xavier Tillman is pretty much ready to go as well. Now in kind of configure it, because we need to see Ja with Marcus a little bit more. We need to see more of Ja with the actual starters. They'll get some time to do that. There's still plenty of time. And again, the good thing about Ja Morant and incorporating him is while it's going to feel kind of like a in-season acquisition in a way, at the same time it's going to be different because Ja's going to get out there. He's played with Desmond Bane this is the 4th year that they played together. This is going to be the 5th year he's played with Jaren Jackson Jr. There's just going to be a lot of familiarity with the main guys. It's just going to be him and Marcus Smart. We'll see how their timelines line up. They might get back on the same day or around the same time. Marcus Smart might beat them get back a little bit sooner. We'll see how that plays out. But the main point is it's good to get Ja Morant kind of wrapping up. This lines up with the timeline. Get him going, get some of those injured guys back, and kind of get them playing together. And then you could try to get, as you said on yesterday's episode, when these guys get back, you needed to gel fast. And that's why I said earlier, the players are really, really they want to win now. They're not thinking, hey, man, we can kind of, whatever happens these next 6, 7, 8, 9 games, it's just what happens. As long as we get Ja back in 9 games. No, they want to win really, really bad. And that's why we talked a lot about the frustration around here. But guess what? Sneak a couple of these wins out, you get Ja Morant back, you get a couple of those other guys back, things could be trending up.
If they do not win the game tonight at home against the Utah Jazz, that means they will enter the month of December without having won a home basketball game. That obviously, it's just numbers and days, and the nihilist view would be, time is a social man-made construct. But the point is, that's a long freaking time to not win a game at home.
It is.
So they are running out of time in a variety of ways. Any semblance of the cavalry coming is welcome here. And you made a great point there, Damichael. One of the unique things about Ja coming off of his suspension, it's not like Smart coming off of an injury, or Kennard or Tillman. They can't play back-to-backs, or they have some sort of issue that they're not able to get out on the floor. Ja's good to go, right? And they, maybe they ease him in because he hasn't gotten a lot of game reps. I could see them doing that. But once they're comfortable, this is somebody, it's almost like a soccer match where you're putting him in. If, it's a 90-minute match, you're basically inserting him in the game 20 minutes into the game, right? And now here comes a guy who is fresh, got fresh legs. It could be a shot of energy. I don't think they're going to go on a 10-game winning streak, but I do think it's exactly the kind of injection of swagger, injection of positivity, especially in Memphis, maybe not around the league, maybe not among other fan bases, but in Memphis, Ja Morant's return is going to be a sight for sore eyes, and that's going to be very good energy to have.
It's going to be a hit. I listen. I've had so many people text me, so many people call me and say, what day, people tend not to know for some reason, even though I write about it all the time. They say, what day is Ja Morant going to play his first home game with the Grizzlies? And I've kind of told people, December 21st. That's the expectation. That's the day Ja Morant is planning to be back according to his NBA suspension. He's supposed to be back December 21st against the Indiana Pacers at home. How perfect matchup if you're a Locked On Grizzlies listener, right? We had this whole Tyrese Halliburton, Ja Morant conversation. Well, guess what? His first home game in Memphis against none other than Tyrese Halliburton, right? So it's going to be fun. And that game is going to be electric. You know why it's going to be electric? Because what did Anthony Edwards say the other day? FedEx Forum was dead. He has never seen FedEx Forum like that in his, brief NBA career. And, just as someone who's been at every game at FedEx Forum this season, that wasn't the only game where the crowd didn't feel like the crowd of the past couple seasons. So with that being said, that Ja Morant game is going to be the chance for all those things to end. You hear him saying, Anthony Edwards saying the crowd was dead. You hear Dylan Brooks saying the Grizzlies didn't have, they don't have swagger right now. You hear someone like me saying the Grizzlies were a top paint scoring team last season. Now they're in the bottom third. They were a top transition scoring team last year. Now they're in the bottom third. everything that I just outlined, from the transition scoring, from the paint scoring, from what Dylan Brooks said about the swagger and so forth, all of that can kind of shift with the return of Ja Morant.
Energy, right? And that is what this team needs a shot of one way or another. It's what FedEx Forum needs a shot of one way or another. It's going to be hard to get up for the Utah Jazz on a Wednesday night. Makes me a little nervous about what the atmosphere will be there going into this contest, but we'll talk more about that coming up next here on Locked On Grizzlies, as well as Ja's still 9 games away. Desmond Bane is dealing with a sore foot, not on the injury report, which is good to see, but Jaren Jackson Jr. has not been performing to his standard. Getting him back offensively, you talked about his 41% field goal percentage on yesterday's show. What can the Grizzlies do to get him going? We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by eBay Motors. I'm a huge fan of the work that eBay Motors is doing this season with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd. Huge supporter of Josh Lloyd, bringing you some of the best fantasy picks each and every week. And the fun thing this week is whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouring the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit your roster. Josh has some eBay guaranteed fit fantasy picks of the week, and we're going to go with somebody who we are familiar with former Coach Ivy of the Memphis Grizzlies coaching staff, Nell Ivy. Her son, right, Jaden Ivey, is playing pretty well for the Detroit Pistons. The Detroit Pistons are not playing well. Don't get me wrong. They are struggling mightily, even worse than the Memphis Grizzlies. But Jaden Ivey is doing pretty well. The Pistons aren't really trying to win right now. They're going to continue to invest minutes in him. So that's one of Josh's picks for fantasy selection. Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is helping you win your fantasy championship. eBay Motors knows the championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. It's the same exact thing with your vehicle. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die car, you can make sure that your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack, bumpers, whatever your car needs, eBay Motors has it. Well, eBay's guaranteed fit is guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time. If you find something that matches or is better, they will get you your money back. At these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your vehicle alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to United States customers, eligible items only, exclusions apply. Damichael, we mentioned Jaren Jackson Jr. struggling right now, not scoring the basketball efficiently, doing well to get to the rim and get to the free throw line. That is important to point out. Still having a career year in terms of assists. He is not as predictable when he puts his head down, starts his dribble, starts his move to the rim, but still fairly predictable. You talk about him going left a lot here on Locked On Grizzlies, and you're exactly right about that. Obviously, opposing teams can game plan for that. Obviously, since it's Desmond and him right now and not much else offensively, it's easier to bring that double team and to not give him as many mismatch opportunities. So going into tonight's game, and this is kind of the start of our preview, but even beyond the Jazz, because obviously the schedule doesn't lighten up all that much, how does Memphis get their second best currently offensive option going? Arguably their best two-way player offensively and defensively. That's not true right now because of his offensive struggles. He's still doing some good things defensively. He's showing growth in some areas of his game, but he has to get his groove back offensively, or else this Memphis offense is not going to get out of its current rut.
Joe, I'm probably going to defer to you a little bit more on this one because my answer is simple. I really don't know. I mean, I'm looking at the games.
Oh,
and I see Jaren.
No.
I see Jaren, but look, Joe, I have reasoning behind it. But it's like I see him get to the rim and move guys out of the way. You say, "Oh, what a good move," and then he can't finish the basket. Or a lot of times, it comes when he's facing the double teams, and we don't see guys cutting off of him. But I haven't really talked about this much later. But I've talked to the players about this, and no, I'm not trying to stir up any drama here with this saying, but I just feel like from the conversations that I've had with the players, I feel like some of them feel that Jaren could be better with making reads out of those double teams.
The drama being dropped here on Locked On Grizzlies. Oh, Damichael Cole.
It's just
Michael Cole.
It's simple basketball is what some players have said. Like I know Desmond Bain says, hey, he was speaking in terms of himself. When multiple guys are at him, he makes the right pass, things like that, blah, blah, blah. But talking to some of the other guys, they say, hey, it's just simple reads, when Jaren is put in those situations. Because I asked the players, I said, when you're spacing the floor, and I'm talking about guys like, David Roddy, Zaire Williams, DeJon Contrast, the guys who are put in those positions where we basically see it, Joe. We see them just standing around, and we're like, why aren't they cutting? Why aren't they doing anything? And they said, and this is where the people that want Taylor Jenkins to go on are going to say, Damichael and Joe, I told you. They basically said that Taylor Jenkins and the coaching staff has emphasized spacing to the point where that is prioritized more than guys cutting, with Jaren Jackson Jr. being in those situations. They want guys spreading the floor, maximizing spacing for a guy like Jaren. But when teams, again, you said this when we first had the conversation about the improved spacing, when teams don't respect your shooters, it doesn't matter. The whole spacing thing doesn't matter, because if it's Zaire Williams and David Roddy and they're two below league average three-point shooters, then is it really spacing just because they're standing behind the three-point line? Like we're just keeping it honest right now. Like we're just being honest. Is it really spacing in that scenario? So personally, I feel like, we've seen Zaire Williams as a cutter. We talk about David Roddy when he gets downhill. I think it's things like that. You get Jaren going more by teams' opponents being feared more by his playmaking ability. This whole just drive the basketball, draw in defenders, kick it out to open shooters things. People aren't threatened by those guys. So I don't really think that's the answer. I think you got to have more guys cutting off of Jaren. Think back to a couple seasons ago when we saw Steven Adams working, from the elbow, and Desmond Bain doing back cuts, and Zaire Williams doing back cuts, and John Morant getting back cuts and things like that. Like, we don't see much of that with Jaren. And granted, that's the Grizzlies offense this season. That's one of the changes, with the new coaches, the assistants and stuff like that. The bigs aren't working off of the elbows as much as they did, in the past. So you don't see as much dribble handoffs in the offense now. You don't see as much just screen and roll, in the offense now. It's more movement based. But at the same time, my answer to this is I don't know, because it's not as simple as getting out of Jaren Jackson Jr.'s way. Teams have to be threatened by those guys on the other side. So my answer is, I guess guys have to cut more, but that doesn't seem like something the Grizzlies are emphasizing.
It's wild to hear you say that, because you're exactly right. Like, they're not doing a lot of those things, but ironically, that was some of their best set offensive basketball, was when they were at the elbow and they were running cuts and direct handoffs and all those sorts of types of plays at and around the free throw line. That was some of their best half-court offensive set work. You say that it's an offense prioritized on motion, and I know you're right. That's what they're trying to do, but there's not a ton of motion. There's a lot of isolation. There's a lot of standing around. And the Grizzlies, except for Desmond Bain, they're not good enough to do that. And I put Jaren Jackson Jr. on that list because he is being a focal point defensively, especially when Bain's not on the floor. But even when Bain is there, they're throwing multiple guys at him, and it might be a simple read in terms of making a pass, but they have to be able – there has to be easier passes to make. Again, I have a football background.
He's not throwing to Luke Kennard out there. Yeah.
If you're able to throw a slant, my fat tail can throw a slant, right? A slant pass, 3 steps and come inside. That's an easy ball to throw. If you're trying to throw fades, if you're trying to go for an inefficient type of shot, even if the goal is to take it at the rim, or even if the goal is to have that spacing that you mentioned, you're exactly right. If your spacing is John Conchar, who doesn't shoot the basketball, even if he's good at it, he's hypothetically good at it because he doesn't shoot it. David Roddy, the names that are currently out there in that mix are not threats to shoot and score from range consistently. It's not working. What's the saying? What's the acronym? KYP, know your personnel. The other opposing teams apparently do that better than Memphis, and because of that, Jaren is struggling. So I'm with you that I don't know how you fix it, except for going back to some of the stuff that they actually had success with in the half court, that for whatever reason they've decided that's the part that they were going to cut. I was hoping they would cut out the isolation stuff that's going on, and that's still very much a part of their offense. Kevin Durant's not walking through that door. They don't have those types of players.
Now let me add this. Let me add this because I want to add on to your point there about the isolation. When we were watching them early in the season, I don't think they were doing as much of this as they're doing now. When Marcus Smart, when Luke Kennard, when those guys were in offense, it was much more movement. And I think that's what they want to get back to. But from talking to Taylor Jenkins, like when I was in Houston, I had a good talk with him. And it was I kind of feel like what he's saying without saying, because he's never going to, call out players. But he said that they're just having to rely on Jaren and Dez a lot right now. And part of that reliance is they just got to get those guys the ball because a lot of the other guys simply can't score on their own. And that's how we've seen, in times where the Grizzlies look panicked, it's just Jaren Jackson Jr. ISO. Jaren Jackson Jr. ISO downhill. Desmond Bane, launching three-point shots, gets offensive rebounds, launch another three-point shot. Like, that's what we're seeing a lot of simply because a lot of the guys they have available just aren't guys that are going to go out there every night and score double-digit points. Like, just Santi is your other guy, and maybe Derrick Rose, guys you can say, hey, they'll go in and score double digits. But after that, you're kind of hoping. You're kind of hoping for someone else to do it.
Fingers crossed, right? And, hope is not a strategy. Hope is something that you hold on to make yourself feel better about situations, but it's not a strategy. There has to be a plan in place. Hopefully, going into the game tonight, we see some tweaks to that plan. Not holding my breath, but there's always a fool's hope, Damichael Cole. We'll talk about Grizzlies Jazz next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, I want to remind you of the fact that the Locked On Sports Today site or streaming channel has launched on YouTube, the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, like Damichael and myself, plus our national shows that cover each and every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is also brought to you by FanDuel. Things are loading up right now in terms of the sports calendar. The weather gets colder, but the NBA and the NFL and others are getting hotter on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's right, you heard me correctly. $150 if your team wins. You've been thinking about joining FanDuel. There is no better time to get in on this action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including things like spreads, player props, over-unders, the ever-popular same-game parlay, and so much more. So what are you waiting for as things get cooler where you probably are? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get on a hot streak with the NBA, the NFL, and FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we preview, again, I feel like we've said this several times, if there was ever a must-win game on November 29th, this would be one of them. Grizzlies Jazz, previewing it next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. I am the Memphis Grizzlies columnist over at Bluff City Media. We've been talking John Morant and longing in a weird and awkward way, at least on my end of the spectrum, for his return here in a few weeks. Still far off from that. We've been trying to figure out how to get Jaren Jackson Jr. going offensively in particular. And it all kind of intertwines with the Utah Jazz because this is a team, Damichael, that, correct me if I'm wrong, the Memphis Grizzlies have seen the most of anybody this season so far, right? I think this is the third game that they're playing Utah.
Yeah. I tied with the Blazers, I believe. They've seen the Blazers twice, but this will be the most. Yep. So this will be this will put Utah at the top of the list, and Utah is getting healthier, right? Walker Kessler, we talked about yesterday, getting a little bit healthier, getting back on the floor. Lauri Markkanen now, however, for the Utah Jazz is somebody that they'll be missing due to injury. So Utah doesn't have the injury concerns that Memphis does. No team really in the NBA currently has those concerns. But they're going to be missing their best player in Markkanen. They have some guys that are stepping up. It's not going to be an easy game by any stretch of the imagination. When you're 3-13, nothing should be considered easy. But I do think Utah is ripe for the picking in terms of this being the night that you sitting at FedEx Forum in the media section witness a victory. What are some of your keys for that to happen this evening? Well, I'm not going to call it a must-win game anymore. Remember, Locked On
Grizzlies?
Yeah,
that's true.
They told me not to say that anymore.
They did.
They were right because the Grizzlies
ended
up losing a couple of those
games. They lost it. We need to leave that out.
I won't say that again. But getting to the keys of the game, just looking at this Utah team, it's a similar situation from the standpoint of Walker Kessler's just returned to the lineup. Lauri Markkanen is out of the lineup. This current lineup that they have, it's not a lot of cohesion in it. John Collins, the last couple games, hasn't been as good as John Collins was, at power forward before that. I was looking at his numbers in particular. When Walker Kessler's in the lineup, his numbers go down a little bit, as opposed to when he and Lauri Markkanen were the front court and Kessler was out of the lineup. So he's still adjusting, playing long. Looks like he's taking more three-pointers. He's not getting as many rebounds, doesn't have the same defensive activity. And he was a guy who kind of hurt the Grizzlies, in that last meeting. So that front court pairing, I want to say they're still working some things out, and that's kind of been where the Grizzlies have been hurt by the Jazz so far to this point. I think Lauri Markkanen and John Collins have just done a good job of outproducing the Grizzlies front court. And so it starts there. Jordan Clarkson has been really good for that team. They're throwing Keontae George in there at the point guard spot. He's kind of learning on the fly. I don't think he hasn't really done anything outstanding against the Grizzlies. But clearly, Jordan Clarkson is the guy. You talk about that lineup that they currently have. Walker Kessler's not going to score. Well, I don't expect him to score.
I was about to say.
Yeah, let me be careful. Let me be careful with my words now. I don't expect him to score, 30 points. And, John Collins has done it before. He's very capable. But again, if you're talking about what we've seen up to this point with him and Walker Kessler in the front court, it's going to be a while before they kind of figure out how that works together. And then getting to the backcourt, it feels like Jordan Clarkson is the one big threat. Agbaji, he's going to shoot three-pointers. He's going to play sound and tough defense. I'm pretty sure that's probably who's going to get the Desmond Bane assignment. Very physical defender. I just watched the Jazz a little bit lately just to see a couple of their games. Watched them against the Pelicans. Watched them against the Suns recently. And Agbaji was guarding Devin Booker. He was guarding, top, perimeter options, like Brandon Ingram and whatnot. So they really throw a lot at him. Looks like he's going to be the guy who gets Desmond Bane, which is funny because he's kind of built like Desmond a little bit, short.
Yeah, like an evil Spider-Man meme.
Yeah, 6'5", 6'5" guy, a little stocky. I don't know what his exact wingspan is, but just from the build with the big arms and 6'5", he's kind of built like him. But anyways, that's kind of how I see Utah matching up with the Grizzlies. Getting back to your point, I think where the Grizzlies need to shine in this game is Walker Kessler is clearly their rim protector, their shot blocker. It's going to be important to key in, keep an eye on him because this is a game. Jaren Jackson Jr. does have a size advantage when it comes to John Collins. I want to see Jaren get downhill and finish some of those other opportunities that we've seen him get because different from a couple of teams that the Grizzlies have played against recently, the Jazz aren't as big on the perimeter. Keontae George is like 6'5". Agbaji is, 6'5", but he's probably going to be guarding Dez. And then Jordan Clarkson is basically the size of a point guard. So when those guys come down to double, it's not really – Jaren's not even going to see them, pretty much. So I'm looking forward to seeing, how that works out as well. So I think, this is a very winnable game. And you've mentioned the Grizzlies haven't won a home game yet. And I envision if they don't win this one, there could really be some frustration because this is a very winnable game. Not only are you playing a team that only has 5 wins, you're playing a team that also doesn't have an identity right now, just like the Grizzlies.
You'd be getting another yelling speech from Marcus Smart on the bench. That's something else maybe we can talk about later on this week here on Locked On Grizzlies. I think that you're right on. The lineup of the Jazz without Markkanen makes for an interesting choice for Taylor Jenkins in terms of the starting lineup. And again, the minutes and how they're distributed, that's more important than who starts. But, Santi Aldama has started next to Bismack Biyombo, Jaren Jackson Jr. They've gone to more traditional 2 big lineups as well. David Roddy getting some run as the small forward. How they decide to begin the game is going to be interesting.
That's a good question.
Do they prioritize? Yeah, what do they prioritize? Do they prioritize a size advantage? Because they would most certainly have it. My default with Taylor Jenkins is going to be he's going to value defense. So I think it's going to be David Roddy. Because I think he's going to assume that he could maximize the value of Santi in terms of his scoring while negating some of his defensive woes if he's a reserve. Roddy's not going to give you a ton offensively, at least in theory, but he will provide some defense, some switchability. I think that he's going to try to keep it closer than hope that Santi can get hot as a excuse me, as a de facto 6-man type. I can see that.
I can see that too. And here's what I wouldn't be surprised, just to kind of play devil's advocate here.
Sure.
I think you could start Santi potentially. Mm-hmm. And in this situation, you have a huge size advantage with Santi. Being that this isn't the Boston Celtics, who have a lot of size, even though he played well in that game and whatnot. But not only do you have a pretty big size advantage, but on top of that, the guys on the other end, for Utah, Abaji, Keontae George, I'm pretty sure he'd probably be guarding Abaji. Not really a huge off-the-ball threat. So if you basically just be there, you close out, and, you don't, have missed assignments defensively, give up wide open 3-pointers, which has happened a little bit recently. And Santi has been involved in some of those sequences. If you stay attached to him and don't give up easy 3-pointers, I think that is an assignment that Santi can handle. When I'm looking at that Jazz lineup, only one guy really scares me offensively, and that's Jordan Clarkson.
Yeah, Jordan Clarkson is the microwave scorer to be sure. And how Taylor Jenkins addresses the non-Markkanen Jazz is going to be interesting to see because, again, Kessler's a good center, but he's not a scoring threat that way. Clarkson's the main guy. They're going to have a size advantage. Do they maximize it throughout the game? Do they try to really throw it all in at the start? I'm interested to see it. I know you're going to see it firsthand, front and center there at FedEx Forum tonight. And with that in mind, that means that it's going to be a Joe solo episode of Locked On Grizzlies on Thursday, taking you through all the different angles of Grizzlies, Jazz, those sorts of things. I might save my take on the Marcus Smart yelling stuff for the next time we're together, partner, because I'm interested to get your take on it as well. But there's lots of stuff, even when the team is struggling, for the Grizzlies to be discussed about from the Locked On Grizzlies perspective. And Damichael and I, of course, will have your back on that as we close out the month of November and head into a December that's going to be pretty eventful with the return of John Morant, and hopefully a lot of these injured guys make their way back as well. Thank you so much for checking out this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Remember that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Again, Locked On Sports Today, 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts from Locked On channels like myself and Damichael, plus national shows that cover every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. Subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Again, make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you're getting this podcast, as well as over on YouTube. Damichael and I are very appreciative. Another strong month, especially on YouTube, of growth for us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's see if we can get to 3,000 subscribers by the end of 2023. That would make me a very happy boy on Christmas to get that gift underneath my Christmas tree. Thank you to Damichael for being a wonderful co-host as always. Thank you to you, wherever you're checking out the show, whether you're an everydayer with us each and every time a new episode drops, or it's your first time checking out Locked On Grizzlies, or somewhere in between. Hopefully, we will have you back tomorrow. For Damichael Cole, I am Joe Mullinax. Grizzlies, Jazz, going to be a good one. We'll talk about it the next time we're together. Stay locked in, folks. Have a good one.